What is actually happening in the brain of someone with schizophrenia? Today, we're going to walk you through the neuroscience of schizophrenia. That is what modern research tells us about brain structure, brain chemistry, and brain circuits, and why this matters for treatment. Let's start with the symptoms. Schizophrenia may helpfully be described in terms of three major symptom clusters. Positive symptoms, which includes hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking. These are experiences added onto normal perception. Negative symptoms, which includes reduced motivation, social withdrawal, and diminished emotional expression. Essentially, this represents a loss of normal function. Also, cognitive symptoms, which may involve problems with attention, working memory, and executive function, and they are often the most disabling. Importantly, these symptoms don't arise from one single brain region. They reflect dysfunction across multiple interacting brain systems. Modern research makes it clear that schizophrenia is fundamentally a disorder of brain circuits, not a single neurotransmitter or a single location in the brain. One of the most consistent findings in schizophrenia research involves structural brain changes. Studies repeatedly show reduced gray matter volume, especially in the prefrontal cortex, the temporal cortex, and the hippocampus. Large meta-analyses involving tens of thousands of participants confirm that these changes are real and reliable. What's especially striking is that these changes appear to be progressive. People in the early stages of psychosis show accelerated gray matter loss over time compared to healthy individuals, particularly in prefrontal and parahippocampal regions. Cortical thickness is also reduced, and the degree of thinning correlates with symptom severity. For example, thinning in the superior temporal gyrus is linked to positive symptoms, while orbitofrontal thinning is associated with negative symptoms. Another classic finding is ventricular enlargement, especially of the lateral ventricles, which reflects overall loss of surrounding brain tissue. What may be driving these changes? One leading idea is excessive synaptic pruning. Normally, the brain refines its connections during development by eliminating unnecessary synapses. In schizophrenia, this process may go too far. Evidence increasingly points to immune system involvement, particularly microglial activation and complement system genes, which contributes to excessive synaptic loss. Now, let's talk about dopamine. The dopamine hypothesis has shaped schizophrenia research for over 60 years, and this is for good reason. All currently approved antipsychotic medications work by blocking dopamine D2 receptors, but the modern dopamine story is more nuanced than simply too much dopamine. Imaging studies show region-specific dopamine dysfunction in subcortical regions, especially the striatum. Dopamine synthesis and release are increased. This excess is strongly linked to hallucinations and delusions. In contrast, in cortical regions, especially the prefrontal cortex, dopamine activity is reduced. This hypodopaminergia is thought to contribute to negative and cognitive symptoms. This creates a dual dopamine imbalance where you have too much dopamine in subcortical regions and too little in the cortex. Dopamine also plays a key role in salience attribution. Salience attribution is how the brain decides what is important. When dopamine signaling becomes dysregulated, the brain can assign excessive meaning to irrelevant stimuli. This helps explain ideas of reference and the feeling that ordinary events are deeply significant. Now, let's move beyond dopamine. Glutamate and GABA, the brain's main excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters, are increasingly recognized as central to schizophrenia. A leading theory is NMDA receptor hypofunction, meaning reduced activity of a specific type of glutamate receptor. This idea emerged when researchers noticed that drugs like ketamine and PCP, which block NMDA receptors, can temporarily produce schizophrenia-like symptoms in healthy individuals. In schizophrenia, glutamate and GABA balance is disrupted in a region-specific way. Cortical glutamate and GABA levels are often reduced, impairing normal information processing, working memory, and executive control. This excitatory inhibitory imbalance may underlie negative and cognitive symptoms and helps explains why dopamine blocking medications do not adequately treat these aspects of the illness. When we zoom out, schizophrenia is best understood as a disorder of circuits. Reduced cortical glutamate and GABA weaken top-down control, leading to disinhibition of subcortical dopamine systems. This cascade can result in excessive salience attribution and ultimately delusions and hallucinations. But the story doesn't stop at circuits. Schizophrenia is also a disorder of brain networks. Large-scale resting state fMRI studies show that schizophrenia is marked primarily by reduced connectivity across major brain networks. One key network is the salience network, the system that helps the brain decide what is important and what can be ignored. In schizophrenia, the salience network doesn't communicate well with itself or with other major networks, including the default mode network, which supports internal thought, and the frontoparietal network, which supports executive control. When these networks stop coordinating, the brain struggles to distinguish what comes from inside the mind versus what comes from the outside world. Irrelevant experiences can suddenly feel meaningful or threatening, what clinicians call aberrant salience. The resting state fMRI study also found reduced connectivity involving the thalamus, which is a key hub for filtering information, and reduced connectivity in sensory networks, which may relate to hallucinations. Interestingly, the one consistent increase in connectivity occurs between emotion-related regions and the salience network, suggesting emotional signals may be misidentified as unusually important. All of this supports a powerful idea. Schizophrenia is not a problem of one broken area, but of a disconnected brain. Finally, schizophrenia is increasingly understood as a neurodevelopmental disorder. Genetic risk is high, but genes alone are not enough. Prenatal complications, maternal infection, early life adversity, and immune activation all influence brain development. Symptoms typically emerge in late adolescence or early adulthood, a period marked by intense synaptic pruning and network reorganization. Many individuals experience a prodromal phase with subtle changes years before a first psychotic episode. Immune dysfunction appears to play a key role here. Elevated inflammatory markers and immune-related genes have been linked to synaptic loss and abnormal brain maturation. Now let's bring it all together. Schizophrenia involves structural brain changes, region-specific dopamine dysfunction, glutamate and GABA imbalance, disrupted circuits, altered brain networks, and neurodevelopmental and immune influences. Understanding these mechanisms is shifting the field beyond dopamine-only treatments and toward precision approaches that target circuits, networks, and inflammation. That's the future of schizophrenia care. Thanks for watching. If this helped clarify a complex topic, please like, subscribe, and share.